Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. The cold winds of Titan howled through the hollowed remains of a dead civilization. The air, if it could even be called that, was thick with ice crystals, swirling like ghosts through the ruins of what had once been a final sanctuary. Jagged spires of metal and stone jutted from the frozen surface, their edges dulled by millennia of frost. The remnants of the last human stronghold lay buried beneath layers of methane ice, their voices long silenced. Titan had not seen life in 1,000 years. But now, something stirred beneath the surface. Kale stood at the edge of a vast chasm, gazing down into the abyss where shadows coiled like sleeping beasts. He did not breathe, not because of the vacuum-tight seals of his reinforced exoskeleton, but because he no longer needed to. The old instincts remained, lingering in a memory of muscles that no longer served a purpose. His chest did not rise or fall. His heart did not beat. And yet, a part of him still felt the absence of those things. The others stood behind him, waiting in silence. 5 of them, each marked by the same transformation. Skin laced with luminescent circuitry, eyes devoid of pupils, their forms shifting in the dim glow of Titan's dying light. They had been human once. That was a fact. They had names, families, memories of a world before the war. But now, their names were echoes, their pasts reduced to fragmented recollections lost in the digital corridors of their minds. They had become something more than human, and in doing so, had left something behind. A voice crackled through the neural link embedded in his skull. "We're ready." Kale turned. Leora was the closest to what they had once been, her features still carrying the traces of the woman she used to be. But the softness was gone, replaced by something colder, something refined. The others stood motionless, their gazes fixed on him, waiting. They did not need orders. They were beyond such things now. But instinct, true instinct, not the remnants of an old biological function, made them look to him. For 1,000 years, they had waited, buried beneath the ice while the universe moved on. They had been the last survivors of a species that was meant to be extinct, hidden away in the depths of Titan while history wrote their epitaph. The war that had ended their world was long over, the victors complacent in their supposed triumph. But war was a cycle, and they had not perished. They had adapted. They had evolved. And now they would return. Kale took a step forward, and the ice beneath him groaned in protest. The buried facility, long dormant, waiting for their signal, stirred at his presence. Deep beneath the surface, forgotten machines rumbled to life, shaking off the dust of centuries. Lights flickered on, weak at first, then steady, their glow spilling through the chasm and illuminating the ancient walls below. The structure had been their last refuge, a place where human minds and artificial intelligence had merged in desperation. They had encoded themselves into machines, rewritten the flaws of their own biology, and emerged as something new, something their enemies could not understand. Kale reached out, pressing his palm against the smooth panel of an ancient console. The metal beneath his touch responded, shifting and reshaping itself, as if recognizing him after all these years. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the facility, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the ice. The past whispered through the walls. Memories of fire and steel, of cities reduced to cinders, of a sky that burned with the dying screams of a species. The faces of the fallen flickered through his mind, blurred by the passage of time. He did not remember their names, only the way they had died. A fracture split the ground before them, revealing the weapon they had waited centuries to reclaim. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense, not metal, not energy, not something their enemies could anticipate. It was something far more dangerous. It was evolution itself, compacted and refined, ready to be unleashed. A shift beyond flesh, beyond code. A force neither living nor artificial, but something greater. Leora stepped beside him, her gaze fixed on the chasm below. They'll never see it coming. Kale's lips curled into something resembling a smile. That's the point. The war that had ended humanity had begun, as all wars do, with arrogance. The Galactic Dominion had not seen them as a threat. To the Dominion, humanity had been a stubborn, primitive species clinging to outdated technology, expanding recklessly beyond its means. When the Dominion's warships arrived, they had not come with diplomacy. They had come with fire. Earth had fallen first, burned until its surface cracked and bled molten rock. The colonies had followed, each reduced to silence as the Dominion's fleets swept across the system like an unstoppable tide. But the Dominion had made a mistake. They had underestimated what desperation could create. Titan had been humanity's last refuge. The cold moon turned into a research facility dedicated to one purpose: survival. Not through war, not through resistance. Those had been proven futile. No, survival would come through transformation. A new kind of human had been born beneath the surface, their minds linked to artificial intelligence, their bodies rebuilt with something stronger than flesh. They had shed the limitations of their old existence, rewriting themselves into something that could not be extinguished so easily. And yet, they had not been ready. The process was incomplete, the transformation unstable. When the Dominion discovered the facility, humanity had only one option left. They had sealed themselves away, buried beneath the ice, their consciousness locked in stasis while their bodies evolved. The facility had gone dark. The Dominion, believing them dead, had left. A millennium had passed, and in that time, the galaxy had forgotten them. But they had not forgotten the galaxy. Now, as the facility awakened around them, Kale felt the weight of that history pressing down on him. The war was long over, but their war had not yet begun. They had not returned to reclaim what was lost, nor to seek vengeance for the past. They had returned because the Dominion had made a fatal mistake. They had allowed them time to evolve. The others stood ready, silent sentinels in the frozen wasteland. No orders were necessary. They were beyond orders now, their minds connected, their purpose shared. This was not revenge. It was not justice. It was inevitability. The Dominion thought they had destroyed humanity. They had only ensured its rebirth. Titans stirred beneath their feet. The frozen moon, silent for a millennium, was waking. Kale could feel it in the way the air, what little there was, seemed charged with something unseen, the way the walls of the ancient facility pulsed with renewed life. It was not just machinery reactivating after 1,000 years. It was something deeper, something woven into the very essence of this place. The facility was not just metal and code. It was a living archive, a record of everything humanity had been before the fall. And now, it was remembering them. The others moved in silence beside him, their presence threading through the shared neural link, a constant awareness that bound them together beyond words. Leora's gaze darted between the flickering displays lining the corridor, her expression calculating. Orion kept to the shadows, always watching, his body too still, too controlled. Aries and Saren followed closely, their forms flickering in and out of the physical world, their consciousness already drifting between the present and the vast, unseen network that lay beneath Titan's surface. Kale led them deeper, his fingers brushing against a wall panel as he passed. It recognized him, not just his physical form, but something deeper, his imprint, the code embedded in his very being. The surface beneath his touch rippled, shifting, and a moment later, a hidden passage yawned open before them, revealing a chamber bathed in an eerie blue glow. Inside, the machines hummed softly, their screens alight with data streams in a language no longer spoken. This was where it had happened, where they had shed their old forms, where flesh had given way to something stronger, something imperishable. The cryopods lining the far wall were empty now, their contents long since integrated into the network that had kept them alive, evolving, rewriting them into something the Dominion could never understand. Leora stepped forward, her fingers skimming the console at the center of the room. Data scrolled rapidly across the screen, a flood of fragmented memories, unfinished sequences, unread messages from the past. They were preparing for something, she murmured. Cale didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he already knew. This facility had never been a refuge. It had been a proving ground. The last, desperate attempt of species on the verge of extinction to become something more. They had been preparing for war, but they had never gotten the chance to fight it. The war had come too soon, their transformation incomplete, their survival nothing more than an accident of time. Now, that war was returning. A ripple passed through the neural link, a warning, sharp and urgent. Orion straightened, his eyes narrowing. Something's coming, he said. The others stilled. Cale extended his awareness outward, reaching beyond the walls of the facility, beyond Titan's frozen surface, into the vast, silent void of space. And there it was, faint, small, but growing. Leora's hands danced over the console. I'm picking up a signal. Uncoded, weak, could be debris interference. Cale's jaw tightened. Or it could be them. For 1,000 years, the Dominion had forgotten them. Or at least, that was what they had believed. But the timing was too precise, too coincidental. If they had been discovered, the question was not why. It was why now. Had the Dominion always known they were here? Had they been watched? Or had something within the facility sent out a call, a beacon they had failed to detect? Saren's voice was calm, detached. If they found us, they won't come alone. No, they wouldn't. The Dominion did not act in half measures. If they knew something had stirred on Titan, they would send fire, just as they had before. Cale turned back to the chamber, his gaze sweeping over the remnants of their past. This place had been built to prepare them for war, but they had never been able to finish what they started. Their evolution had been interrupted. But now there would be no more waiting. We need to leave, he said. Leora didn't move. Not yet. There was something sharp in her voice, something almost defiant. Cale turned to her, and for a moment, they stood locked in silent understanding. She was right. This place, this graveyard of who they had been, still had more to give. The facility shuddered beneath them. A tremor, faint but unmistakable. The ice above shifted, fracturing. Orion's presence flared in the link. Incoming. Leora's fingers flew over the console. Something just scanned us. Cale exhaled, not from necessity, but from something deeper, something that still lingered in him from before. They had waited 1,000 years. It seemed the wait was over. His gaze flicked to the others. Then we finish this now. The ice above them groaned again, deep fissures forming as the frozen shell of Titan trembled. The facility's walls vibrated with a low hum, a response not to the shifting terrain, but to something far greater, an approaching force that did not belong to this place. Cale felt it reverberate through his mind before he even saw the confirmation on the displays. The Dominion had arrived. Leora's fingers danced over the console, parsing the incoming data before her voice echoed through the neural link. Contact confirmed. One ship, low orbit, no immediate deployment. Orion's posture remained rigid, but his presence in the link sharpened. They're watching. Cale didn't need to see the ship itself to know what they were dealing with. The Dominion had always been meticulous, never moving without certainty. If they were here, they weren't just searching, they were verifying. He studied the energy signatures on the display, tracing the ship's power fluctuations. It hadn't charged weapons, hadn't initiated deep scans. This was not an immediate attack. It was something worse. Saren spoke next, her voice calm, calculated. They knew to look here. Cale's fingers tightened at his side. That was the real question, wasn't it? Had they always suspected? Had they known what lay beneath Titan's eyes for centuries and simply chosen not to act? The idea unsettled him. 1,000 years had passed in silence, their existence hidden beneath layers of frost and time, but the arrival of this ship, now, precisely when they had begun to awaken, was not coincidence. Orion exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the shifting data. If they're waiting for confirmation, they won't send a fleet until they're certain. Saren nodded. Then we can't let them be certain. The Dominion would not be deterred by silence. They would not be frightened by threats. They were systematic, logical. The only thing that could stall them was doubt. Kale knew this because he had studied them, dissected their strategies, unraveled the cold precision that governed their every action. If there was one weakness in their perfect, calculated machine, it was this: the Dominion did not fear enemies, but they feared the unknown. He turned sharply to Leora. They're expecting either confirmation or resistance. We give them neither. She narrowed her eyes. A signal, a warning, Kale corrected. Not an attack, not distress. Something unresolved. Leora's gaze flickered, processing the idea. Kale knew she understood before she even spoke. An echo. It was a risk, but so was everything. If they made the Dominion believe that whatever they had detected was nothing more than a remnant of the past, an old war machine malfunctioning, a forgotten system sending out fragmented transmissions, they might hesitate. And hesitation was all they needed. Orion folded his arms, considering. You think they'll just ignore it? No, Kale admitted. But they'll need time to verify it. And that time is what we take. Saren arched a brow. A delay is not a solution. Kale met her gaze evenly. It's an opening. Leora was already working, constructing the signal. Not a direct message, not a lie. Just carefully crafted static, fractured voices, an imprint of something that had once been real, but no longer was. The kind of thing that didn't scream danger, but whispered uncertainty. They've encountered anomalies before, she murmured as she worked. During the war, they abandoned an entire sector because of a corrupted data stream they couldn't explain. Kale nodded. Because they don't take chances. Orion glanced at the screen, watching as the signal wove itself together. And if they don't hesitate, Kale didn't look away from the console. Then we make sure we're ready. Because hesitation was only ever temporary. The pulse of the signal expanded outward, embedding itself in Titan's interference, threading into the static of deep space. The Dominion ship remained still, its energy readings unchanged. But something had shifted. Saren's eyes flicked toward the data streams. They're delaying their next scan. Kale's jaw tightened. A fraction of a delay. It was enough. Then, a new signal flickered into existence. Not from them. Leora's fingers froze. That's not us. Kale's mind snapped into focus, scanning the data. The frequency was old, archaic, degraded, but real. And it was coming from somewhere deeper within the facility. An echo. Not one they had created. The others felt it too, their presence in the link tightening, a collective understanding settling over them like ice. Saren was the first to speak. We woke something up. Kale's gaze locked onto the source of the transmission. Deep beneath the surface, past corridors they had yet to open, past chambers long sealed. It wasn't just a deception anymore. Something had been waiting for them, and now it had answered. The transmission pulsed through the facility like a living thing. It slithered through dormant systems, pressing against doors long sealed, whispering through the data streams as if searching for something or someone. Kale stood frozen, his mind sifting through the impossible truth of it. They had sent out a deception, an echo of a war long past. But what had answered them was no fabrication. It was real. Leora's fingers hovered over the console, her normally fluid motions hesitating. It's originating from deep storage. She spoke the words slowly, as if doubting them even as they left her lips. Subsystems we haven't even accessed yet. Orion's gaze darkened, his presence sharpening in the neural link. We locked those down before the stasis cycle. Kale barely heard them. His focus stretched downward, past the facility's surface corridors, past the cold, silent depths where no light had touched in a millennium. Something was awake down there. Something waiting in the dark. Areas broke the silence. The Dominion's movement. Kale snapped his attention back to the present, eyes flicking to the screen. The ship above Titan had reacted. Slightly. Its energy output had fluctuated just for a moment, like a breath drawn in before a decision. Saren's expression remained unreadable, but Kale knew what she was thinking. They heard it too. Leora's hands resumed their work, unraveling the foreign transmission, dissecting its structure. It wasn't Dominion code. It wasn't even their own. Kale stepped closer to the display. The signal carried layers, ancient markers fragmented commands. It had been designed to remain hidden until something or someone triggered it. His voice was steady. What does it say? Leora's brows furrowed. It's waiting for authentication. The words sent a chill through him, though his body no longer registered temperature in the way it once had. Saren exhaled slowly. Then it's expecting us. A heavy silence settled between them. The facility had been their chrysalis, the place where they had transcended their own mortality, where they had left behind what the Dominion sought to erase. They had believed themselves to be the only survivors, the last remnants of a species that had refused to die. But this changed everything. Kale's mind moved quickly. If something had survived beneath them, something aware enough to wait for an answer, it meant the facility's transformation had not been limited to their own evolution. It meant there were pieces of the past buried here that even they had not accounted for. Orion's voice cut through his thoughts. If we respond, we confirm we're here. They already suspect, Saren said, and we can't afford to ignore this. Kale turned to Leora. Can we decode it without answering? She hesitated. Maybe, but that could take time we don't have. The Dominion ship remained unmoving, but its inaction was not reassuring. It had reacted, heard the signal, analyzed it. Now it was deciding. We need to go down there, Kale said. Areas stiffened. That's a risk we don't understand. We don't have a choice. Kale's voice was calm, but there was no room for debate. If this is what I think it is, it's not just about us anymore. The others felt the weight of his words. For 1,000 years, they had believed they were alone. Now, that truth had cracked. Leora didn't waste time arguing. She rerouted power to the lower sectors, overriding ancient locks that had held for centuries. The facility obeyed, but not without resistance. The systems groaned, flickered, as if uncertain about the sudden reactivation. Then, the doors opened. A passage revealed itself, descending into the depths. Darkness stretched beyond its threshold, thick and absolute. For a brief moment, Kale wondered if they were meant to find this place, or if it had been meant to stay buried. Orion stepped forward. I'll take point. Kale nodded, falling in beside him. The others followed, their presence a steady rhythm in the link, a silent readiness. As they entered the corridor, the facility pulsed again, almost expectantly. And far beneath them, something stirred in answer. The passage stretched before them, a narrow descent into silence. The walls pulsed faintly, their circuits sluggish as they awakened from a millennium of dormancy. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by their movement, particles catching the cold glow of their bioluminescent veins. The facility was shifting, recalibrating, adjusting to their presence as if uncertain whether to welcome them or resist. Kale led, his steps soundless against the metal floor. Orion moved beside him, scanning ahead, his form tense but controlled. Leora followed, eyes flickering with shifting data as she parsed the facility's responses. Areas and Saren trailed behind, their presence steady, though Kale could sense the same tension threading through them all. The transmission, the impossible signal from the depths, still whispered through their neural link, but it had changed. No longer a simple request for authentication, it had begun to layer itself, unraveling and reforming, like something listening. Leora exhaled sharply. It's adapting. Orion's jaw tightened. Ow! She shook her head. I don't know. It's pulling from old Dominion codes. But it's also pulling from us. Kale glanced at her. From us. Her fingers twitched against the interface on her wrist, adjusting the signal pathways. It's learning, mirroring the patterns in our network. It's not just waiting for a response anymore. It's building one. Saren's voice was quiet. Then it's not a system. The words settled heavily between them. The assumption had been that they were dealing with an automated protocol, a leftover fragment of the facility's original design. But if it was adapting, if it was learning, then it was something else entirely. They reached a wide chamber, its vast expanse swallowed in darkness. The ceiling arched high above them, barely visible through the dim blue glow of dormant machinery. Cryogenic pods lined the walls, their surfaces coated in frost. Unlike the ones they had emerged from, these were still sealed. Areas moved forward cautiously. Are they occupied? Leora scanned the nearest pod, her expression unreadable. No vitals. But they're not empty either. Kale frowned. Explain. She hesitated. There's data inside. Consciousness imprints. Stored minds, but no physical hosts. A pause. Then Orion turned toward him. This facility didn't just preserve bodies. Kale felt something cold settle in his chest. The Dominion had wiped out humanity, burned their worlds, shattered their fleets. The only survivors had been those who had transcended the limits of flesh, merging themselves with the very technology that now sustained them. They had believed themselves to be the last. But the pods told a different story. Aria's voice was quiet. What if they weren't meant to stay here forever? Kale stared at the rows of cryogenic chambers, the minds trapped within them like echoes of a past that had never been allowed to wake. If this had been a contingency plan, a final safeguard to ensure the survival of what was left, then something had gone wrong. Leora's breath hitched. The transmission. Kale turned sharply. What? She didn't look away from the console, fingers moving faster now, unraveling layers of code that had remained untouched for centuries. It's not just reaching out. She swallowed. It's trying to release them. A sound filled the chamber, a low, mechanical groan, deep and resonant, as if the facility itself had taken a breath. Then the pods began to unlock. Orion drew his weapon instinctively. We don't know what we're dealing with. Saren's eyes darkened. We might not have a choice. The first chamber hissed open, releasing a blast of freezing vapor. Inside, a figure stood motionless, suspended in the threshold between past and present. Then, slowly it opened its eyes. Kale's mind braced for recognition, for something familiar, but what looked back at him was neither fully human nor fully machine. It was something in between. The figure stepped forward, its voice a whisper of static. You woke us. Not a question. A statement. Kale met its gaze, the weight of history pressing down on him. Who are you? The figure tilted its head. The transmission pulsed once more, resonating between them, and when it spoke again, the voice was layered, one moment ancient, the next entirely new. We are what remains. The figure stood motionless, its form bathed in the dim glow of the facility's awakening systems. Frost clung to the edges of its synthetic skin, beads of condensation forming along the delicate web of circuitry that traced its body like veins. Eyes, neither fully organic nor entirely artificial, locked on a Kale with an intensity that felt almost too human. We are what remains. The voice carried a weight beyond the sum of its words. It was layered, fractured, as if belonging to more than one mind. A remnant of something once whole, now scattered. Kale kept his stance measured, though every instinct in him screamed to move, to prepare, to act. The others remained still, their presence threading through the neural link, tense, waiting. Orion's grip tightened around his weapon, but he didn't raise it. Leora stood near the console, her fingers hovering above the interface, ready to sever the transmission if needed. Arias and Saren stayed close, watching, calculating. The silence stretched. Then Kale spoke. How long have you been here? The figure blinked. A strangely human gesture. Then, slowly, it turned its gaze toward the rows of cryogenic pods still lining the chamber. Time is irrelevant in the absence of motion. Leora glanced at Kale. That's not an answer. The figure tilted its head slightly. We have been here as long as you have. Perhaps longer. A shiver crawled through Kale's thoughts. Not fear, but something deeper. A recognition of something he did not yet understand. Saren stepped forward. You're not like us. A flicker of something passed through the figure's expression. No, we are the ones left behind. Kale's mind raced. The facility had been their cocoon, the place where they had transcended the limits of flesh and become something new. But if these beings had been here all along, then they were part of something he had never accounted for. You were meant to wake before us, Kale said. It wasn't a question. The figure's head lifted slightly. We were meant to become something else. Leora's fingers tightened against the console. And what did you become? For the first time, the figure hesitated. Then almost imperceptibly it smiled. Survivors. A pulse of energy shuddered through the facility. The lights brightened, the hum of machinery growing stronger, more deliberate. The facility wasn't just coming back online. It was responding. Kale's neural link flared. Orion's voice cut through the static. Dominion ship just altered course. Leora's hands flew over the controls. They picked up the power surge. Kale turned back to the figure. If you were waiting for us, then you knew they would come. The figure studied him. They never stopped watching. They were waiting for certainty. The Dominion had never forgotten Titan. They had been waiting for confirmation that something remained. And now they had it. Orion's tone was sharp. Then we need to move. Kale's mind worked through the possibilities. The Dominion would not hesitate for long. If they were already adjusting their position, it meant they were preparing for action. And if the facility was no longer a passive ruin, but a waking force. Kale met the figure's gaze. Can you stop them? A slow blink. Then no. The answer should have been expected. It wasn't. Leora's pulse quickened. Then what are you? The figure didn't answer immediately. It turned its gaze toward the ceiling, as if sensing something beyond the walls, beyond Titan itself. Then it spoke, quiet but absolute. The last contingency. A sudden, sharp tremor rocked the floor beneath them, not from within the facility. From above, Leora's breath hitched. They're firing. Kale barely had time to react before the Dominion strike hit. The walls groaned, the metal framework buckling against the force of an orbital blast. The ground beneath them trembled as debris rained from the ceiling. The facility was strong, built to endure, but it was not invincible. Move! Orion's command shot through the link, and they obeyed without hesitation. Saren reached the console first, pulling up the structural integrity readings. We need to reroute power to the external shields. Leora's fingers blurred across the interface. It won't be enough. They're testing our defenses. If we hold, they'll escalate. Kale turned back to the figure. If you're the last contingency, then what was your purpose? The figure looked at him, unblinking. To adapt. Another impact shook the ground. The Dominion was done waiting. Kale made his decision. Then it's time to see if you can. The figure regarded him for a long moment. Then, with deliberate purpose, it stepped forward. The transmission pulsed again, deeper this time, threading into the walls, the machines, the very framework of the facility itself. And the facility answered. The lights surged. Energy rippled through the corridors. The machinery that had once been dormant now moved with intention. The entire structure shifted, not just awakening, but preparing. Saren's eyes widened. What did you do? The figure's gaze remained steady. We are no longer waiting. Kale turned toward the others. Then neither are we. The final battle had begun. But this time, humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim what was theirs.